If you've clicked on this video, you know what Death Note is. Today, I will go through all the arcs of Death Note and discuss my thoughts and opinions on them. Keyword is opinion. This entire video is my opinion, and feel free to disagree. Obviously, there will be spoilers for Death Note in this video. Finally, what counts as an arc can be debated, but I chose mine based on important story changes. I'll say what episodes are in each arc, so look for that. Alright, let's get started. I'm calling the first arc of Death Note the Kira arc, and while it's short, it's very important. A lot happens here, and it greatly establishes the general character of Light. I like how he's almost the entire focus here. We don't need any other major characters yet. We just need to see Light evolve and learn the rules of the Death Note along with us. The show presents us with a bored high schooler who happens to pick up the notebook of a bored Shinigami. I love the way this is very much glossed over by Light. He goes straight into destiny and how he's the chosen god of the new world, when in reality, he was just the first person who took the notebook by complete chance. I also really like how the ability is introduced. We see Light momentarily regret what he did, or rather be scared that what he did actually worked, but he quickly realizes what he must do. He begins using the notebook for what he believes are noble intentions, but as we see later, all he is a crazy mass murderer with the worst murder weapon in history. But that's still a while from now. Now I just want to make one thing clear. For research for this video, I rewatched the entirety of Death Note, and at the same time I read the manga. So in this video, I will go over both, as there are some minor differences. Alright, getting back to it, I really like how Ryuk was written here. While the Shinigami realm was unfortunately very underused for my taste, Ryuk is by far the best part of it. He provides some clear comic relief from the beginning and tells us exactly what awaits us. Light will be killed by him, and there's no way to prevent that. The first episode ends on a good note, with one of the most iconic scenes being shown, depicting Light killing dozens of criminals from his own bedroom. Seeing the lengths Light goes to hide the notebook is also a great way to show how intelligent he is and how well he can avoid police capture. However, we see Light's first great blunder with his killing of Lindell Taylor. This mistake would be extremely costly later on, allowing L to narrow down to the region of Japan where Kira resides. This was an amazing introduction to L and showed someone who could finally rival the mental capacity that Light possesses. All great things from these first two episodes. In fact, I'd call them perfect. There is nothing to complain about. They introduce the world we will spend the next 35 episodes in perfectly and leave the viewer wanting more. This is the hook, and it's just the tip of the iceberg. The next episodes all follow two separate plot lines, one of Light experimenting on prisoners to see the limits of the Death Note in preparation to kill the man following him, and one of the investigation team meeting with L to solve the case. The arc starts with the grand reveal that Light's father is in charge of the investigation against Kira, providing Light with insider information. From here we see Light make a move that I personally think is a little stupid. He practically shows L that he has insider information by killing criminals at certain times as soon as he's suspected of being a student. The point of this was not only to brag to L that he can win even after handing him information, but to also force L to not trust the police force. While I can see why this was beneficial, I personally believe Light should have just stayed out of it. But, I mean, there were a lot of times Light should have stopped, but his pride didn't let him. This leads to L sending FBI agents to Japan, which is exactly why this idea was stupid. It gets Light followed, to which Ryuk asks Light one of the most what-if questions of the series: the Shinigami Eye deal. Throughout the series, Light never takes the deal, which makes sense. However, it will always be interesting to think how he could have won if he took the deal. He could have seen L's real name, Rei's, Naomi's. So many situations could have played out differently, especially if he made the deal at just the right time. Once again, Light's pride prevented him from winning. The bus situation is up next, which I personally think is the first brilliant plan of the series. Light uses so many tactics here, having the guy see Ryuk, the fact that Ryuk is unkillable, his experiments allowing him to control the guy, and the way he sees Ray Penber's name is also extremely smart. His next plan is one that I personally find a small plot hole in, but correct me if I'm wrong. When he approaches Ray from behind, why could L not see that on camera? I mean, we see that there was footage, so why not of this? Besides that, this is another great plan by Light, and for sure his riskiest. Frankly, it felt a bit out of character for him to go there himself and say that he's Kira. There was a lot that could have gone wrong here that luckily didn't, or I guess unluckily. After the agents die, we see L's first true loss. He not only didn't get any closer to finding Kira, but he let 12 innocent agents die. Coming off this event, L bounces back by meeting with the remaining 5 officers chasing Kira. These 5 will remain as some of the most important characters of the series. Well, most of them. This is also a good time to say that L is an amazingly written character. So fun, but also very smart. He never feels stupid, but he has so many little quirks that he's just funny to watch. I've always loved this part at the end too, one of the few times he smiles throughout the whole series. Now here comes one of my most conflicted parts of the story. Light delivers clothes for his dad, and just so happens to meet Naomi Misura, the fiancé of Ray Penber, who attempts to give the police information about the Kira case that she's gathered herself. Now, I love the part here that is just Light and Naomi talking. Especially after reading the BB murder cases, she is such an interesting character, and I love the little we saw of her. My problem stems from the way the arc progresses. Naomi knows more about the Kira case than L, and staying out of spoiler territory for the book, I'll just say that she is extremely intelligent. However, the longer we go through these episodes, the stupider she seems to get. She starts by giving Light a fake name, and tries her best to get out of the situation. Light continues to creepily follow her and comes up with an admittedly good idea, to tell Naomi that he's working with L and that she should be recruited. My main problem with this is that Naomi for some reason loses all reason when L is brought up. She just gives Light her real name, no evidence needed. Some might say that Light being the chief's son is evidence enough, but I disagree. Especially considering what we saw in the BB murder cases, it makes no sense that she just let herself be killed like this. This could just be chalked up to Oba writing himself into a corner, or something more sinister, but we'll talk more about the handling of female characters in this show later. For now, just know that I don't like this ending, but it does give an admittedly good scene of Light being unnecessarily cruel about killing Naomi. From here, L convinces the task force to let him put cameras in the homes of the Yagamis and the Takimuras, the two families being investigated by Ray Penber. These are noticed by Light due to a trick he planted earlier, and so the problem becomes how does he kill under these conditions? And we get the most iconic scene of the anime here. While it is ridiculous, it does show how Light has some seriously brilliant plans that can even fool someone like L. Now, for my third favorite episode in the entire series, Encounter. This episode has near perfect scenes throughout, focusing almost entirely on Light getting into university. The first hint of what this episode is about comes in the entrance exam, where we see a familiar looking student sitting behind Light. This reveal gives the audience so many questions, specifically if L is simply following Light or if they will interact. As we see at the entrance ceremony, L plans on taking the offensive. After they finish giving a speech together, L begins telling Light that he knows who he is to prove that he's familiar with the police. He finishes off by dropping the bombshell that he is L. This is a great move for L to make, but it's also a great way to make the show way more interesting. Having L and Light directly talk is what makes Death Note what it is. Even in just this first scene, we see Light overthink the way he reacts and what he says to L. This puts L at a clear advantage, with him using the fake name Hideki Ryuga. If Light attempts to kill him, the pop star will die. On top of that, as of right now, there is no evidence that this is really L. Light also observes all of this, with him screaming, truly losing his cool for the first time in the series, yelling at Ryuk and complaining about the power of the Death Note. Encounter is an all-time great Death Note episode, but even besides the way it's written, it perfectly segues into what the series will become. Light and L pretending to be friends while both investigating each other. Just before our next arc starts up, we see Light and L play tennis, which is another amazing scene that encapsulates their relationship extremely well. Both overthink the tennis game to an overwhelming degree. After this, we see the two in a cafe where L plays a pretty smart trick on Light to deduce whether he's Kira or not. The trick is so confusing that I didn't even get it on a first watch, but L essentially uses the 3 photographs of things prisoners actually wrote and gives them to Light to investigate. Light completely rules out a 4th photograph for seemingly no reason other than that he is Kira and he knows that there is no 4th. L obviously calls this out. Finally, Light's dad having a heart attack is an interesting cliffhanger, but it doesn't really affect anything at large. Conclusively, the L arc of Death Note is what furthers the story into becoming the interesting cat and mouse game that the series is known for. It's another near perfect and excellently told arc. The second Kira arc is another great turning point in the battle between L and Light. It introduces another mainstay character, as well as the way L would eventually be killed. Before all of that, we can talk about how the second Kira is introduced. Through Sakura TV, a tape is aired that claims to be Kira. After proving that they are indeed Kira, they explain that they want public support. This scene is good. I like how we don't see Light for almost the entire episode, leaving some things up in the air. Ukita goes to stop the broadcast and is killed. I can't even pretend I care, to be honest. He wasn't a bad character. The bigger question here is how did Kira, specifically Light, kill Ukita? His real name shouldn't be known, so this presents the question of whether Light made the eye deal or not. The way this problem is solved, by having Soichiro crash into the headquarters and forcing them to stop the broadcast, is fine, but I would have preferred to see something else. It's a very minor nitpick, but it just feels slightly too unrealistic. Finding out that Light didn't do the killings provides us with one burning question. Who is the new Kira and why did they gain a Death Note? Right when this question is asked, it's answered by showing us Misa Amane, a model who has Shinigami eyes, being followed by Rem. Rem is by far the most important Shinigami other than Ryuk. However, she is greatly underdeveloped. She facilitates much of what happens later. Misa, Higuchi, L's death, all of these things were caused by Rem, and yet she feels very half-baked. She loves Misa, but not romantically, but it seems greater than just respect? I'm not really sure. I understand the backstory of Jealous dying for Misa. I just fail to see why that would make Rem want to do the same. Misa also gives the important ultimatum that either L will appear on live TV or the deputy director, leaving L in a tough spot as to how he will avoid dying. In an attempt to test Light, L invites him to view the tapes and tell the task force his conclusions. This scene is well done and well played by both Light and L. It culminates in Light being given more responsibility at the task force, much to his pleasure. L will similarly use this as an opportunity to investigate Light. After the task force sends a fake video pretending to be Kira, Misa begins to show a bit of her stupidity, with her discussing Shinigami in a response tape. This is the beginning of L figuring out how Kira kills, which was always one of the more interesting things to watch for me. After this, Misa sends the task force a diary that contains an obvious time for the two Kiras to meet, but also a more discreet meeting, discussing notebooks, something only Kira would understand. This will bring me into a topic that I will bring up several times, but as much as I love Death Note, all the women are written extremely poorly. Misa will be portrayed as smart, in some ways rivaling Light, but then she'll suddenly become as stupid as a board. It seems that Oba sees women as very easily manipulated pawns, and this is not to say that it's not okay to show smart people being manipulated. The problem is that you can't write manipulation like this. Misa from the beginning says that Light can just use her because she loves him. Sure, you could say that this is Misa's belief in love, but with other characters like Naomi, Takeda, and Rem, it's safe to say that Oba writes women as stupid and almost always just as pawns for men. But he can't just have them be dumb. He has to always contradict that by having them be sometimes smart when it's convenient to the plot. It's just frustrating to see characters so poorly written in such a great series. I love Misa, and I don't think she's extremely stupid or anything. She's just trapped in a world that's written by someone who writes women unfortunately, to put it lightly. But back to the show, Misa is presented with how to kill a Shinigami, knowledge that would become very important later on. This method of killing is also a little wishy-washy to me, like how much emotion should a Shinigami feel to die? But that's a minor issue. Light, by the instruction of L, goes with Matsuda to Shibuya on the day Misa wrote about the notebooks. This was so that Matsuda could catch Light doing anything suspicious, but to both Light and L's dismay, there are no signs of the second Kira anywhere. Misa, on the other hand, sees Light with her eyes, as lifespans of Death Note users are not visible. See, another example of Misa being smart, but that's all thrown away when she shows up at Light's house and begs to be his girlfriend. This whole scene is pretty bad to me, but it introduces an interesting dynamic. Light can't kill Misa because Rem will kill him. This is a great way to keep Light from just discarding Misa whenever he wants. Furthering the story, Rem agrees to kill L at Light's next notice. This goes into a scene of L telling Soichiro that if he dies in the coming days, Light is Kira. The reason for this is some evidence they found on the tapes and Ryuzaki's suspicion that the Kiras have met. At school, Light sees Ryuzaki again before Misa quickly runs to meet Light. This is one of the tensest moments in the series for me. Misa has seen L's real name, and there are so many parts that leave you on the edge of your seat. When Misa expresses her confusion at L's fake name, when the crowd comes, when L steals Misa's phone, and finally, the reveal that Misa was arrested on suspicion of being the second Kira. This is a great turning point in the series, and the introduction to our next arc. I like how this creates some conflict with Light. He has to put an end to the confinement of Misa to prevent Rem from killing him, but he must also take suspicion off of himself. The arc ends with Light coming up with his plan, telling Ryuk that this is goodbye. While I think this arc is a bit weaker than the previous, it introduces characters really well, even if those characters are flawed, and provides a nice cliffhanger into the next one. The Confinement Arc is quite short and, in my opinion, potentially the worst. This isn't to say that it's bad, but when the entire arc is watching 3 people in prison, it can't be too enjoyable. I also find the whole concept to just not be believable. Like, I understand Misa's determination when she still had knowledge of the Death Note, but she stayed in confinement for 50 days after giving up her memories. She was blinded and constrained to an upright position. No real person could live under these conditions and stay sane. Frankly, it seems entirely unbelievable. Similar story with Light, but at least he could see. One thing I do enjoy is how we see Light give up ownership. There is clearly a plan that we don't fully know about, but it involves Light going back to being Light. I also like how well this showed how desperate Ryuzaki is for Light to be Kira. Even after weeks of the killings continuing, Ryuzaki refuses to let Light out. Light's plan to take suspicion off himself works extremely well against Aizawa and the rest of the task force, and eventually the culmination of his dad killing him had me on the edge of my seat on a first watch. Once again though, the mental strain this experiment would put on a normal person would be detrimental, but that's besides the point, I guess. Overall, I would say that the Confinement Arc was necessary and a good transition, but still just a little odd. In my opinion, the Yotsuba Arc is one of the more underrated arcs of the show. A lot of people say it's boring because Light isn't Kira or that it feels too confusing, but I've always personally seen it as another near-perfect arc. Starting off, L's idea to chain himself to Light is a good move for him to make, but also a good way to confirm that L will not be killed by Light until the case is solved. This is also one of the 2 times in the series I'd say L shows legitimate emotion. We see Ryuzaki depressed that Light and Misa weren't Kira, or rather that the power of Kira can seemingly be transferred, making the case essentially unsolvable. The scenes of Light and L fighting are very cathartic in a way. I'm not sure why, but it's just good to see these 2 characters who hate each other so much finally directly fight. This arc also introduces Iber and Wedi, who are interesting characters, but I will say that they feel a bit useless. I don't see why they were necessary, specifically Iber, but I guess it's always fun to see new characters. The scenes of Ryuzaki making the task force members choose between being an officer or working against Kira is interesting, but so mean. I'm not saying it's bad writing, it just shows how harsh L can be. Aizawa leaving is realistic and well written in my opinion. I wish we saw a little bit more of him and his family, but the scene with his daughter is genuinely heartbreaking. The next episode shows a similar disregard for developing the task force members. While I like what was done in just this episode, I wish it was brought up again. It shows Matsuda feeling inferior to the task force, and so he makes the extremely risky decision to break into Yotsuba and eventually finds proof that one of them is Kira, but he ends up being caught in the process. This leads to an amazing plan by Ryuzaki that allows Matsuda to survive. Like I said, this episode itself is fine, but I don't like what it represents. I wish we saw more episodes focusing on task force members, specifically Aizawa and Matsuda. I think now is a good time to talk about the Yotsuba members. Most of them are pretty underwhelming. The only 2 that are really important are Namikawa and Higuchi. Namikawa was a character I legitimately really liked. Higuchi is the exact opposite. They did a great job at making this guy super unlikable and frankly disgusting. The reason I decided to discuss them now is that this is the point where Ryuzaki has cameras placed in the meeting room and where Light contacts Namikawa to be their mole. This brings in the very brief conflict of L and Light versus the rest of the task force. This conflict felt a bit useless, but it helps show that L is willing to let others die for his investigation. We also get the more casual scenes of Light, Ryuzaki, and Misa all discussing the case. While it's a funny scene, it doesn't feel out of place, and I quite like it. It also shows Light refusing to manipulate women, which is hilariously ironic considering what he does as Kira. Despite this, Misa still helps, which is nice to see because it gives her a bit of purpose. This scene is also quite tense, with her being tasked with finding as much information as she can while being interviewed by Yotsuba. Suddenly in the bathroom, we get reintroduced to the world of the Shinigami, with Rem telling Misa everything again. I like this. It makes Rem just the smallest amount more interesting, and once again, proves that Misa isn't stupid, especially with the plan she concocts later. Finding out that Higuchi is Kira is interesting, and he's honestly probably the best pick. Like I said before, he's just so slimy and unlikable. Misa's plan to trick Higuchi into thinking that she has the Death Note, eventually proving to the whole task force that he is Kira, is a really cool and well thought out plan. Great writing for this more Misa-focused episode, and I wish we saw more like it. From here, the arc really picks up, with the initial plan to catch Higuchi killing commencing. The plan is amazing, and seeing someone like Higuchi, who is pretty easily manipulated, fall into all these traps is funny. The wild goose chase to find Matsuda's name and the rest of the Yotsuba members betraying him is really satisfying. The next little bit is just an intense chase against Higuchi, in which Soichiro is shot due to him not taking a gun as it is against Japanese law. This is an interesting scene that seemingly proves the point Light makes in the final episode of how people who are just will never win. But that's for later. Seeing all options leave Higuchi as he's cornered thanks to the help of Aizawa is a phenomenally done scene. But what makes it even more interesting is that this will allow Ryuzaki to get his hands on the Death Note, for L to finally be able to learn how Kira kills. It's a big change in the series. That's where I'm going to end the Yotsuba arc. While some might say it goes up until episode 25, the next 2 episodes are so different that I'm calling them their own thing. To me, the Yotsuba arc was amazingly told, and while it was slow in the beginning, it ended with some of the tensest and most satisfying scenes in the series. This is a very short arc, but arguably the one that changes the series the most. As the name suggests, L dies here. But before all that, let's go back to L getting the Death Note. That scene did not disappoint, with L realizing all his suspicions were true and immediately deducing that there are 2 notebooks. Light's reaction to getting all his memories back and the line immediately after is the perfect return of Kira.
I've won.
Even if I was starting to like Light Yagami again. Him killing Higuchi is another super tense scene that is done really well, and even though he may not know the reasoning, it seems like Ryuzaki can immediately tell the difference in Light. Misa also gets her memories back, and in an attempt to make Light happy, redoes the Shinigami ideal to see L's real name. Ryuzaki interrogates Rem, who never really responds, but for some reason Ryuzaki believes the 2 rules added by Light are fake. I'm not sure why he believes this so suddenly, but I guess it could be chalked up to his stubbornness of not letting Light and Misa go. Light meeting Ryuk is also a great scene, and from here we move on to my second favorite episode of the series, but it's really close. Silence. This episode is known as the one where L dies, and it's pretty obvious why. The episode is borderline from his perspective. It has what I think are the only scenes that are from his perspective and nobody else's. I will say that this episode is handled very differently than it was in the manga, but this is a rare case of the anime doing something absolutely better. There is nothing I prefer about the manga. The anime really did this justice. It starts with us seeing L as a kid with Watari, transitioning into him simply staring at Watari. The entire episode is extremely somber and borderline creepy. It's almost as if L knows that he will die, which is entirely possible. He seems very sure that Light is once again Kira, but with a fake rule he can't prove it. This episode also has Misa's song about Light, which is once again almost creepy. I love this scene though. It has some excellent lighting and just looks beautiful overall. Seeing Light manipulate Rem with Misa is sad. I feel bad for Rem. Ironically though, Rem is my biggest problem with this episode. I really wish we understood why she cared about Misa. Like I said before, I know about jealous, but why was she willing to kill herself and let Light live just so that Misa could be happy? Anyways, we get one of the best scenes of the show with Ryuzaki and Light on the roof. Personally, I've always interpreted this scene as L being honest with Light for the first time. L discusses some bells, which likely represent how he knows his death is soon approaching. He then goes on to say most of what he says makes no sense and that nobody should listen to him. I've always seen this as him venting his frustrations about how nobody believes his theories about Light. Light gives a canned response to this in his normal fake tone. L then asks Light an extremely interesting and direct question, whether Light has ever told the truth or not. The weight of this line is clear by the complete silence that follows it. Slowly the sound fades back in as Light gives another canned response. I always saw this as L asking Light one last time if he was Kira or not even to convict him, just for his own satisfaction. L remarks that he thought Light would give that kind of response and they go back inside. The foot cleaning scene is bizarre, but an interesting allusion to Jesus and Judas. Finally, we're brought to the scene where L is getting ready to test the fake rule. If it is fake, he will arrest Misa. This leads Rem to kill Watari, who immediately deletes all data as he was told to do so by L. As the entire task force building becomes red, L falls. This scene is perfect. Literally couldn't have asked for anything better. The faces, the sounds, everything is perfect to show how cruel Light is. How he didn't win because he's smarter. He won because he's crueler. In the manga, L says that he knew Light was Kira all along, but I'm glad the anime removed this. Ryuzaki being silent works far better and is way more dramatic. From here, I completely stopped rooting for Light, to the point that it was almost unenjoyable to see him win. I know some might wonder why it took me this long to get to that point, but up until L's death, I felt some satisfaction seeing the protagonist succeed, even if I didn't agree with what he was doing. Light also kills Wedi, Iber, and the Yotsuba group. I feel bad for all of them, but Light has become completely unforgivable. These 2 episodes are some of the best in the series, and although it's a short arc, this is one of the best handled arcs from the manga. Now, moving on to the next arcs, you may expect me to call them far worse than these ones, but just hear me out. Here is where a lot of people say that Death Note became bad. A lot of people even dropped the series at this point, which I personally think is a little stupid. While I agree that the second half could be called weaker than the first, it is not drastic to me at all. I would recommend people who have only watched the anime to read the manga. The Death Note anime cut out a lot of the manga here, and it made the entire half feel weaker. The biggest paradigm shift is who Light is fighting against. With the death of L, the job goes to his 2 successors, Nier and Mello. I really liked how they're both introduced, with Nier clearly being the one out of them more like L. L, and with Mello even being offered to work with him, to which he declines. I love these two characters, especially Nier. I will never understand anyone who says he's boring. Look at him play with his toys. Same for Mello, although I feel like he was done very dirty in the anime. They cut out tons of scenes with him, and it makes him feel a little irrelevant until the very end. Looking past that though, I think they're both majorly underrated characters. The time skip also happens around here, which was a good idea. It really makes it seem like the task force and Nier are going against everyone. Nier immediately establishes himself as a threat by showing the president all the research he was gathering, and he's referred to as L's true successor. The next scene shows us Light sitting with the task force and his family. It's a nice scene and a good way of reintroducing Sayu for later. We then get the reveal that Mello kidnapped the director of the NPA, claiming that he will use any means necessary to beat Nier. This is an interesting conflict. Seeing both Nier and Mello trying to catch Light individually is super cool to watch. Light killing the director was an interesting choice, but it obviously backfired hard when Mello kidnapped Sayu. This is a great way to create suspense. Whether or not Light will kill Sayu is an amazing way to create conflict and leads to some great development in his dad. Since Sayu is in the US, Light calls the director of the FBI, who just so happens to be with Nier, and we get a great introduction to Light's new opponent. Nier is immediately very confrontational, calling Light the second L and telling him all about the SPK. I really love this scene. It shows that Nier is not really exactly like L, being slightly more direct with Light, but the way he talks is definitely reminiscent of him. Nier lets Light handle the situation, no doubt to try and gain more information on how he works, but also to prove that he is incompetent. The exchange of the death note for Sayu is super tense, and the entire time anything could go wrong. It eventually all culminates in Sayu living, but the death note getting into the hands of Mello. Nier calls Light out for losing, which annoys Light. The episode comes to an end with a great sequence of both sides being in bad spirits, and Nier witnessing all the members of the SPK with publicly known names die. The whole scene, accompanied by Nier's dice building falling, is done extremely well. It ends with Nier contacting Light to tell him what happened, and revealing his suspicion of Mello. Although we see that Nier doesn't fully trust Light, as he lies about the existence of a photo of Mello. This also marks the beginning of Sito, who is a Shinigami that Ryuk stole the death note of. Sito is more so a tool for Mello to use, and also a tool to get rid of one of the death notes in the human world. He's an okay character, I guess, just super boring. This episode is also one of the more egregious examples of the second half skipping parts of the manga. Several chapters are skipped, including one of Light demanding that the president work with him, and Mello also threatening the president. We also see that Sito helps out Mello's gang in this part. While some may see it as superfluous, I personally see these scenes as important, as they show both Light and Mello working around each other. Without these scenes, Mello seems a lot stupider and less important. Anyway, Light uses a very risky plan that frankly feels a little odd. He sends a letter to the task force's Kira, giving them a death note to use to kill Mello. While I think this plan pretty much told Nier that Kira was within the task force, I don't really know what else Light could have done. This leads to the task force raiding the base on November 10th, which is funnily enough my birthday. Light's dad then gains the Shinigami eyes from Ryuk to kill Mello, and they commence their raid. It goes well until we see Soichiro have Mello cornered, but hesitating to write his name. This is to the great frustration of Light, who fails to understand why his father is risking his life just to not kill the man who kidnapped his daughter. This leads to Mello blowing up the hideout and escaping. Now, what I don't understand here is why Light didn't just use the notebook to kill Mello. It would be unrealistic for him to die here, and as far as I can tell, Light knows his name. Maybe I'm missing something, but regardless, Light's father lies in the hospital with fatal injuries. This is an all-time pathetic moment for Light, trying to get his father to kill Mello before he dies. He is exclusively thinking about his own interests as his own father dies. However, importantly, Soichiro reveals that Light isn't Kira due to his lifespan being visible. He dies believing his son not to be Kira. That brings us to the end of the Mello arc. This arc was handled terribly in the anime, frankly. While there are good moments, I think it's probably the weakest arc so far, other than maybe the confinement. Although I will say that the seeds are now planted for a very interesting final batch of episodes. Nier and Mello are established well, at least in my opinion, and seeing Light in a generally losing position is interesting. But from here, I'd say that I like the more complicated direction the series takes, and am excited to explore Nier more. I feel as though this arc is really the beginning of the direct battle between Light and Nier. Both of them take pretty offensive positions and both play extremely well. By extension, this is also the point where Nier begins to believe that the second L is Kira. While this conclusion may seem a bit unrealistic for Nier to reach with such little evidence, he confirms that it's only a small suspicion and is mostly due to the way the notebook was sent to the task force, which makes little sense for Kira to do. The president discussing his neutrality on Kira is a very overlooked scene that I think is amazing. Light tells the task force that if Kira wins, he will be justice. justice, but if they win, they will be. It's an interesting idea that the victor is the one who writes the story, and therefore the one who is just. I think it's also super insightful that Light says this to the task force to try to assure them that they are right, but it also is a message to himself that if he continues, everybody will see him as justice. Now, another scene that is sadly neutered in the anime is Mello invading the SPK. We see in the manga that he lives in Hal's bathroom, as Nier did not place cameras there. Hal also feeds Mello information about the case, and they seem to be in a more romantic relationship in the manga than in the anime. Anyway, Mello invades the SPK with Hal as a hostage and demands that Nier gives him the only surviving photo of himself. We see here that Mello truly hates Nier, even considering killing him. As I keep saying, I find Mello and Nier's relationship super interesting. They both have their own methods of being successful, but as we see later, they can't win without using each other. Mello tells Nier that the notebook has fake rules in it and that the Shinigami exists before leaving. This leads to Nier contacting L and asking him which of the rules he thinks is fake. He answers honestly, and this leads the task force to start believing Nier's theory that L may be Kira. Aizawa and Ide are especially suspicious, talking in secret about how they will talk to Nier. Light realizes he has to act quickly and concocts another interesting plan to kill the SPK after he realizes that they're getting too close. He uses his supporters to raid the building. Nier counters him with an equally brilliant plan of distracting everyone with money and leaving in full cover. This makes Nier sure that Kira is the new L, to which he once again tells the task force. This leads them to start believing it, as the previous L also suspected Light. I like the way they do this. The task force can't arrest Light because at this point, he isn't even doing the killings. He's become so powerful that he can kill them all at essentially the press of a button. This is something Nier tells Aizawa in the manga, but I think this scene is cut out from the anime, which is unfortunate. Aizawa contacts Nier and tells him about why Light was cleared. He practically tells Nier who the second L is by saying a little bit too much. Surveillance on Light and Misa once again commences, with Misa being searched by Mogi and Aizawa. It is then revealed that the notebook has been passed on to one of my favorite characters, Teru Mikami. Mikami was chosen due to his devotion to Kira, intelligence, and similar viewpoints to Light. With Light and Misa under surveillance, the only question is how Light will contact Mikami. Before we get into that, I want to just talk about Mikami for a second. As a child, he had such a strong sense of justice, but to the point that he would hurt himself to save others. But as he got older, it began to get more brutal, and his own mother told him to stop getting himself hurt for other people. This all slowly wore Mikami down, to the point that he wished these people would all be deleted. After this, the bullies and his mother die in an accident, which terrifies Mikami. Later in life, there were multiple times where he wished for someone to die, and they did. He began to think that there was a god looking down upon him, and when Kira came, enacting the exact kind of justice he believed in, he was a strong supporter. He worshipped his new god, and upon being given the power of that god, he realized that he really was special. Where that line of thinking took him, we'll see later. After Mikami kills Demagawa, he decides to choose Kiyomi Takeda as the next spokesperson for Kira, someone Light dated in college. I have a lot of problems with the character of Takeda. I think she's written just like all the other Death Note women, which is to say unrealistically. It's not as bad as Misa, as Light's manipulation here is a little more realistic, but Takeda is still pretty dumb. I also hate the way she's given no serious backstory. I would say that Takeda and Mikami are equally important characters, and while Mikami gets an entire chapter dedicated to his backstory, Takeda gets nothing. It sucks because Mikami's backstory is part of the reason I like him so much, so I really would have liked to see that for Takeda. We get some scenes of Mello and Matt, which, while nice, are almost unnecessary. I really wish we saw more of Matt. He feels borderline weird because they don't really introduce him. He just shows up with no introduction like we were meant to know who he is. Now we get to the little game Light plays where he meets Takeda nightly to communicate with Mikami. The scene of Light getting in direct contact with Mikami is great, and Light plays off it super well. Him telling Takeda everything is also super well lit. It looks beautiful. The scenes of Nier talking to Light are always amazing. They both clearly hate each other so much, and hearing them indirectly challenge each other is amazing. Now we see Light lay out his final plan, with him asking Mikami to let Takeda do the killings while Mikami continues to do them in a fake notebook. Misa and Takeda also start their little beef here about Light, which I personally hate. Neither of them are likable here, and these scenes generally amount to nothing. Nier also finds out about Mikami, and while I've always defended him, this feels a little too far. While I understand that he can view dozens of screens at once, I don't know why he'd be so sure about Mikami. Regardless, he's right, and Giovanni eventually touches the notebook, just to not see Ryuk. Misa and Mogi are apprehended by Nier, which eliminates Misa from the equation for basically the rest of the series. While it's sad to say, I think Misa was one of the less well-written characters in the series, especially in the second half. At this point, everything is in place for Light and Nier's plan, although it seems like Light has the upper hand. This is until Mello and Matt work together to kidnap Takeda. This creates a tense situation because Light no longer needs Takeda, and if the SPK or police get to her first, they'd find the pages of the Death Note. After Takeda calls Light, confirming that she killed Mello, Light kills her, Both of these deaths are done well. I especially feel bad for Mello and Matt. While they weren't great people, especially Mello, it is still sad to see them go. And Takeda's death is also pretty well done. And that brings us to the end of the X-Kira arc. I thought it was pretty good. The anime is definitely worse than the previous arcs, but I will maintain that the manga is much better. I think Nier getting more involved was also a great decision. But now we see our final arc with the end of Kira. I'm just gonna say this now, this is my favorite arc. While I have some problems with Death Note, none of them are present here. It feels like the culmination of all the plans laid out in the previous 6 episodes all coming together. The deal for the ending is that all people working on the Kira case will meet in a warehouse with the Death Note present. This plan commences, and on the car ride there, Light thinks about how this will be the beginning of the new world. What's so interesting here is that we know a bit of Light's plan, but we don't know Nier's at all. There must be some reason why Nier would agree to this. In fact, he brought up the idea of meeting. So why? Well, before that, we see Light walk into the warehouse and see Nier wearing a mask of L. This annoys Light severely, who has none of the respect he had for Nier that he had for L. Light appreciated the way L was generally more secretive than Nier. He was careful with what he said. Meanwhile, Nier simply says what he thinks. There aren't as many mind games. He repeatedly tells the group that Light is Kira and accepts no other suggestions. Nier takes off the mask and tells the group to pay no mind to the man who will look in from the door. Light seems completely unbothered by the fact that Nier knows his plan. Nier explains that the man outside is writing their names in a fake notebook and that none of them will die. The one person whose name he doesn't write will be declared as Kira. Upon Nier saying this, Light knows he's won. He explains that he had Mikami pretend to do the killings while it was Takeda the whole time. Nier had replaced an already fake notebook, while Mikami had the real notebook hidden away. Light explains that Nier lost because he wasn't careful enough. He claims that L would have considered the notebook to be fake and tested it, but Nier was too stupid to think of that. Light asks Mikami to come inside as he counts down the time before they should die. As the time reaches 40 seconds, Light can barely contain his laughter before proclaiming his victory. This is the craziest cliffhanger I have seen in a TV show. I cannot imagine going about my life for a week not knowing what the answer was. It's a good thing I'm watching this over a decade later. The final episode being called New World is amazing. The wording Light always used when talking about his utopia, but in this case, it's referring to how the world would never be the same after Kira died. As Mikami finishes counting, everyone remains alive, much to Mikami and Light's dismay and confusion. Nier takes the notebook and shows everyone how Light's name is not present, and for the first time, we see Light panic. In the entirety of Death Note, we have never seen Light genuinely freak out in front of people, but here his face and voice is like no other time in the series. Nier explains that the reason he won is that Mello kidnapped Takeda, which allowed Giovanni to find the real notebook after Mikami went to get it to kill Takeda. I see a lot of people say that it's Mikami's fault that Light lost, but to me, this is as much Light's fault as it is Mikami's. Light never told Mikami that he had the notebook scrap in his watch, and so Mikami did what he thought he had to do. The reason Nier won wasn't because of a mistake, it was because he and Mello finally worked together. Mello made Mikami grab the real Death Note and Nier's tail caught him. Nier and Mello represent the different aspects of L, and they will never be able to surpass him without working together, something Nier and eventually Mello both acknowledged. Mello represents L's impulsivity and offensive plays, like when he directly went up to Light and said that he is L. Nier represents the way L sat back and planned. Things like the way he caught Higuchi and how he found Kira's location felt very reminiscent of Nier. Nier and Mello were both amazing characters, and I love this as their final moment together. As Light runs away from his fate, he begins hysterically laughing and confirming that he is in fact Kira. This is a good time to say that Light's voice acting in both sub and dub is phenomenal. Death Note is the only anime I always watch in dub. Almost everyone's voice acting is amazing and fits their character super well. The ensuing speech by Light is very well written, with us directly getting told what his ideology is. The manga has him speak for a bit longer, which I find to be more interesting. He discusses how he believes that kind-hearted people shouldn't be forced to live in a world where there are criminals roaming around ready to harm them. He also claims that true justice doesn't exist in our current world. People who try to be good-hearted in this current world, like his father, will only be killed. I mean, Soichiro died because he couldn't write down Mello's name, and he was shot by Higuchi for refusing to take a gun. Light claims that crime going down is proof that his theory is true. People are happier under Kira, and it's unfair for these people to take him away for their own selfish desires. Light then asked the people against him if anyone else could have done this, if they would have come this far. Light knew that killing was wrong, but he believed it was a job entrusted to him. This is an excellently written speech, but Nier's simple response destroys all of it. Light is not a god. He just so happened to pick up Ryuk's notebook and became a mass murderer with the worst murder weapon in history. A society ruled by fear is not a good society. People People being good out of fear that a godlike figure will cast judgment on them is not healthy. It's like a dictatorship. Light doesn't take into account any circumstances for crimes. This is not meant to be a political statement, but justice needs a spectrum and reform is possible. Some people are in situations where they have to commit crimes to live. Killing those people accomplishes nothing, but Light can't see this. He's too blinded by his own ideals, and so he attempts to use a piece of the notebook in his watch to kill. He quickly reaches for it, and the name he writes is so interesting. He attempts to write Nier's real name, the only unarmed person in the room, the only person who can't kill Light at a moment's notice, but he chooses Nier because he's petty. Even if it gets him killed, Light wants to prove that he was better than Nier, and by extension, L. Before he can get the name down, Matsuda shoots him. I love this. Matsuda was the only person in that room who believed that Light wasn't Kira. The entire story he believed in Light, and seeing him act like this must make him feel so betrayed. As Light begins writing the rest of Nier's name with his blood, Matsuda repeatedly pounds Light with bullets before nearly blowing his head off. This scene gets dark pretty quick, with Light groveling on the ground begging for someone to save him. Now, here is where the manga differs pretty heavily from the anime. I'll discuss the manga first. As Light calls out to Mikami, he denounces his former god. This leads to Light going to his only other option, Ryuk. Light asking Ryuk for help leads to him writing down Light's name. This was a cool ending. It made sense that Ryuk would do this. I mean, he did say that he would never help Light, and seeing him beg for his life after just proves how pathetic Light truly is. Light's life ends with him dying alone in the warehouse. There's also an epilogue that's absent from the anime that shows the task force discussing cases with the new L, aka Nier. This also adds the theory that Nier wrote down Mikami's name to make sure everything went well, as said by Matsuda. While Ide denies this, it has evidence as Mikami died a few days later in prison. This theory really changes the way Nier can be interpreted. He does say that he's no different than Light, so perhaps he did write Mikami's name. Regardless, the manga ends with some Kira worshippers, including Misa, praying to their god. The manga's ending is great, but the anime's is beyond perfect. The anime continues where we left off, but instead of Mikami denouncing Light, he kills himself with the pen he used to write the names. I like this ending way better. Mikami immediately denouncing Light felt a bit out of character. Instead, I think it's more interesting to think that seeing Light grovel on the floor made Mikami realize that not only was Light not the god he thought, but Mikami therefore wasn't chosen by God. He kills himself in fear that his entire life's principles were based on this dying man, and that maybe he wasn't as special as he thought. During this time, Light runs out of the warehouse with no destination in mind. He isn't trying to use one final trick to kill Nier. He isn't pleading with Ryuk. He just starts thinking of what could have been of the honor student with a bright future, the model teenager, a respectful, smart, and kind young man that turned into the bloody mass murderer we see today. Ryuk hits us with my favorite line in the series, talking about how he and Light both eased each other's boredom, and how this ending was inevitable. The show ends with a beautiful scene of Ryuk writing down Light's name as he lays down to die on a staircase. We get one more shot of all three owners of the Death Note, with Misa's implying that she kills herself. As Light dies, he sees a vision of L looking down on him. This is one of my favorite TV show endings ever. It's so emotionally charged, beautifully animated, phenomenally written, and New World is for sure my favorite episode of the series. I truly believe that even if you hated the second half of it, it is all worth it to see this end to Light. One of the best written anime characters of all time, killed by the very god who gave him his powers. All it took for Light to die was for Ryuk to become bored, and that is the difference between a god of death and a murderer. And thus ends not only the show, but my retrospective. Before I go, I just want to say thanks for making it to the end, but to also show your support for this video. Most videos on my channel are about JoJo, but I like other stuff too, so if you want to see more, like, comment, anything, it helps me know that this is what you want to see. Anyways, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again.